So I'm glad you asked me to answer that question because there's no point in a person getting skills if the person doesn't get a job. So the more important need is to ensure there are enough jobs. And of course, if you have skilled people, the chances that you may run a better enterprise are much higher, and therefore you need the skills. But skills, the lack of skills is not the only constraint on starting an enterprise or growing an enterprise. It's a thought experiment if you were to ask some people, because at the moment they're saying is that I can't grow an enterprise because I can't fire people easily. I'm just throwing it right in because I want to come to some points here. I can't fire people easily. And say, well, okay, from today onwards you can fire as many people as you want. So please hire some people. And you say, but I have to pay them, so I have to set up an enterprise or grow it, and permissions required and markets required. The constraints on the growth of enterprises are not in, or hardly in, the inability to fire people when you want them. It is really in growing the enterprise and able to produce competitively and sell competitively. Um, so having introduced that notion, that's the enterprises that have to grow, and what are the constraints on the growth of the enterprises that we should look at. Sabir, I did, since my wife said, since yesterday I've been doing homework for this discussion. Yes, notes and notes. I've been going back into my notes for the last few years and just put down some things here. And I came across Arjun Sengupta's report, the National Council Committee for Employment in Unorganized Sector. And I remember I was not in the Planning Commission then, this was months before that, and Arjun called me and he said, look, we finished our report, have you read it? I said, no, I've read a newspaper account. He said, no, I want you to read it all. I'm going to get the secretary of the commission, which is being wound up, had been wound up, to send you a copy. So the man called me and said, I'm searching around, there must be one last copy somewhere. So I've got his very precious last copy. So I read it. The introduction, Arjun Sengupta, in the introduction, he said that we are focused so much in our planning process on the growth number, the GDP growth number, and I think we need to be far more concerned about the number of jobs we are creating and not the growth number as much. And it made sense to me because I say, unless there are jobs, you're not going to get young people engaged, and if they're not engaged, they don't save, they don't spend, and all that about growth and inclusion will not happen, apart from the social political problems that will arise if they do not have jobs. So I joined the Planning Commission. Then a few months later, I'm invited to join the Planning Commission. So coming with my orientation in industry, it's about growing enterprises and the challenges of growing enterprises and so on. And Arjun Sengupta's reminder that please make sure the planning process focuses on jobs. I come in the Planning Commission and say, let's gather all the parts of the Planning Commission together to think of what are the principal challenges of this country. And so we had a very systematic process for a few months. Pranab Sen, who was then in the Planning Commission, myself, we organized people to work in cross-divisional teams for the first time. Earlier they worked in their silos, and they all had perspectives, working what are the challenges of this country. And in a big conclusion workshop, which we did at the Pusa Institute, where 200 officers of the Planning Commission for the first time, they say that they could remember, some who'd been there for 30 years, that they'd been together, working together on commonly on the issues of the country. They ranked then what are the biggest challenges of the country. Number one was jobs, and very close to it, and then they debated maybe higher is the growth of enterprises, the formation and growth of enterprises, yeah, which is required for jobs. Okay? So we then went back to write the 12th plan to address the challenges. Well, what do you think happened? The 12th plan chapters looked just like the 11th plan chapters because the divisions went back and wrote their chapters with some changes in numbers and so on. And jobs and the growth of enterprises never appeared as a subject to focus on. So now the Planning Commission is wound up, or when it was winding up, some of us said, look, a midterm appraisal has to be done. Let it not be done like the midterm appraisal we did, which we just take the same chapters, every member looked at the chapter, do the numbers add up or not, and said, some appraisal. Let's say that a different lens has to be used to the whole plan. The lens should be the big challenges of this country, are they being sufficiently addressed? And so we had a little debate to say, what would we say are the principal challenges? Number one, the member said, is jobs, and couldn't decide whether the formation of enterprise or jobs comes higher or lower, but that's what has to be done there. So we've left a note, the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister apparently has written to the new Prime Minister to say, if you form a new planning commission, please ask them to look at the progress of the development and plans of this country from these perspectives. Number one is, are we creating enough employment opportunities, enough jobs? Now, clearly we are not. We know that. We've tried to hide it for some time, then we can't hide it anymore, that the employment elasticity of our growth in India has been dropping quite drastically the last 10 years. In fact, since the 1991, it has been dropping, and in the last 10 years, it has dropped quite sharply. Our employment elasticity, that's jobs per unit of growth, is worse than almost every country we can compare ourselves with. So whereas we have had higher growth rates than many other countries in GDP growth rates, the number of jobs we've created in proportion is less. Now, there's the quality of growth, in other words, which Arjun Sengupta was trying to remind us of. Look at that, and we have to come to that. But how do you create enterprises? You've got to remove the constraints on the growth of enterprises, and which is why I come back to say, let's be quite honest and realistic and not ideological about what are the growth constraints on growth of enterprises. Every consultation that we have done with small enterprises and through their forums, and then again and again and again, not just we, other associations have done it, talk about the number one constraint is the small enterprises do not get working capital and finance. So if you don't get working capital or finance, why are you going to hire people? You've got to run your enterprise and then you care about people. Similarly, when you ask the larger enterprises, what is your biggest constraint on growth? It's not finance in their case, but they talk of government procedures and all the rest of it, which is stuck projects and money not returning because projects are stuck. So once again, I come back to saying that the biggest constraints are not really in skills, and certainly they're not in labor laws. They are on other real constraints that have to be addressed if you want the jobs. So having said that, I know we have to talk about skills, and I will, because skills are very, very central to the management of our enterprises. The growth of our enterprises. But the skill I want to point to is the skill of good management. Because every consultation we've done in labor-intensive sectors like textiles, for example, when you get down to the people, and you ask now the owners of the enterprises, small and large ones, to say, well, why is it that your efficiency of enterprise is not improved? Because that improves your competitiveness. Why is it you're having labor trouble inside your little enterprise? And they say, the quality of the supervisor, the manager, is what is missing. So the vocational skill they need to get that system to work is the vocational skill of a manager to get the system to work. I just want to jump to what you talked about coordination. I think the national agenda is to put much better vocational skills in management in the government. Because that is such a constraint on the improvement of anything else that we do. So we have, in the Planning Commission, came down to finally, in the 5th year, we put down to say,
Mr. Maira, can you put this?
in the 5th year we said, if we had to say what's the principal constraint to the growth of India, it is in the quality of implementation and coordination that you pointed out to. And can we, as a vocation, develop the skills for coordination and implementation in the country, applying them in the government sector, but applying them to other enterprises also, and to work together. If we can do that, right, then we can get your program to scale up much faster and many other things to happen much faster. But let's come to what Subir, you said very rightly. Spatial problems of matching, temporal problems in matching, and I would say specification problems in matching. That do these people have exactly what I need to be really productive? And in that, the producer organization has a very clear role. The specifications you can say, but in the development of things which are tacit and can't be specified and made explicit, you have to do it yourself on the job with the people. So let's compare some numbers. I've got lots and lots of numbers here, big numbers. In the United States and the UK, as a contrast to Sweden, Germany, and Japan, the amount of attention and internal effort that firms give to retraining their people or providing skills to people is less by a factor of about 4. It's 1/4. This is an Accenture study, which was published by The Economist last year, that in the UK, which is the worst, only 8% of the firms reported that they had spent any time themselves in skilling the people. They expect the government system to do it. In the case of Germany and Sweden, it's about 35%, and Japan equally high or higher also than that. Now look at these three countries as a contrast to the UK. And in the US, it is worse. Only 20% of the firms, only very few firms said that in the last 5 years, they had spent any effort to provide fresh retraining to their own people in new skills required by them. I'll get the exact number there. So now we're talking about, when you say the sectors need to grow jobs, to Subir's question, it's not IT, it's not the government. It is, we're talking about the manufacturing, construction sectors, where it's vocational skills, skills to do physical things, do that. The UK and the US have almost killed their manufacturing industry in competition with Germany, Sweden, and Japan. So the orientation of employers in Germany, Sweden, and Japan are far better lessons on what should be done to improve the competitiveness of the enterprise and what the enterprises should ask of the government. And so I find it no surprise that the UK government is being asked by its employers for further labor flexibility, whereas the German employees don't ask for it. And again, this is why the economists, and the economists can be very right-wing, but when they say something which supports, where Sabina, around a left-wing idea, it must be right. And saying that the correlation between labor flexibility and a sustainable creation of jobs is not established. The US and the UK labor markets are far more flexible than the markets of these other three countries, and yet creation of jobs and sustainable jobs in manufacturing is much higher in these three other countries than it is in these two Anglo-Saxon countries to do that. So I come down to what is the orientation of managers required, the spatial connection between the skilling and the use in their large enterprises. The temporal comes automatically then because you're developing and the specifications are taken care of. If you're small enterprises, you can't do it entirely yourself because you may not have the equipment or the wherewithal to invest in the time that is required to do this. Then clusters come into the picture. So then the quality of clusters in which the skilling is managed by the cluster with the help of the government or other providers, and the enterprises themselves have a role in the finishing of it, and the specifications back there becomes very crucial. So we are finding back in the Planning Commission, the last was, that if the system, the large enterprise or the cluster works more effectively together, the stakeholders in these systems work more effectively together, we can address the spatial, temporal, as well as the specification problems in scaling far more effectively. So it comes back to this institutional requirement. Better coordination, better collaboration between stakeholders. This collaboration cannot be done up in there. It has to come down and to be done by the people on the ground. Ram, you'll be very pleased. We have introduced, we talked about it, the India Backbone Implementation Network, and Pradeep is yes and all that. It's really taking off very well, where people get the idea that I, with other stakeholders together, have to solve this problem, not wait for someone there to coordinate us and to solve this problem. So in industrial relations, we've got the unions working now for the last 6 months with the employers' federations to say skilling and job growth and enterprise growth has to be solved by us. Most of the solutions are with us. There are few we'll have to ask the government for rules to suit what we want to do. Similarly on clusters, we moving to get the collaboration done. I was in Mumbai, where Pemandu of Malaysia, who are our partners in IBIN, have introduced their methods in Maharashtra, which is one of the worst states in terms of coordination between things because the coalition and so on. And the issue they've taken is water for all, which is a very serious problem for different sectors of Maharashtra. And Ram was there last week, and here I find at the university, all this place created, these government officers from 10 departments and from the districts, about 30, 40 people from the government side, 10 or 15 from the private sector side, 10 or 15 experts and NGOs. And I was told that they had been together there for 4 weeks. And you say they leave within a day or so? For 4 weeks. So I was amazed. So I said, why didn't you go back after the first day? So he said it seemed quite interesting and different. So I stayed the second and the third. And I haven't gone back still. Because I was told I could stay here so long as I was producing some value for what my department is responsible for. And it's a method that was being used, which was enabling people to understand, yes, and to collaborate, which was making it happen. So I come down to a key, which sounds to an economist, which is why I said earlier, I'm not an economist, but better coordination, better collaboration, faster solutions to systemic problems will produce better economic outcomes. So this is the root cause, and if you apply methods to this root cause, I think we create enterprises much faster, jobs in the enterprises much faster, and the skilling will be part of that process. It can't be a separate process to the creation of enterprises. Thank you.